Hello and welcome to another episode of B2B Unplugged. I'm Dan Bassett, your host and founder of Brandtail, and today I am joined by David Perkins. David, hi.
Hi, very nice to see you.
Yeah, likewise. Well, thank you for joining us and welcome to the show. Before we dive into the detail of the episode, do you want to give us a little bit of background to you, who you are, and your background within marketing?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So hi, I'm David Perkins. I'm a B2B marketing leader and consultant for startups and scale-ups. For the past 13 years, I've been helping craft strategies that help businesses increase their market penetration across the UK and in the EU.
Excellent. And that you were at Trainline for was it almost 5 years?
No, less than that. It was just over 2.
Okay. One of the things that I wanted to really ask you, and I think is something that it's an interesting dialogue that I've had with a couple of other sort of senior marketers, is when you work for a brand that's got a really big brand, like Trainline has, it's got obviously a big consumer brand, but you're focused on the sort of B2B side of things. Did that benefit you in any way? Obviously, having that brand work that was almost already done from a sort of consumer perspective, or did it hold you back because people thought, well, they don't do B2B stuff anyway, so it doesn't matter. I won't bother speaking to them.
Well, it's a very double-edged sword in that sense. You have all of the groundwork in terms of sort of awareness of the larger parent brand, I kind of refer to them as. Especially in the UK, most people know who the Trainline are. So you have that. Oh, I know what they do. But then so you're not building a brand from scratch, but you kind of are building a smaller brand within that. Almost like a competitor brand. So it's a double-edged sword. The good thing about it is that usually you have a bit more budget than you would if you were a brand new actual competitor brand in the marketplace. You're not a bootstrapped startup, with VC-backed funding where every penny is being counted. So you have a bit more budget, but then you're also often not necessarily the priority for the business if you're that sort of startup brand within the larger brand. So you are, working kind of twice as hard, but also not quite as hard in some ways, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you find it was slightly easier to sort of activate people once they saw something from Trainline? They were more likely to engage, open emails, that type of thing. But
In a way, I mean, it's useful in the sense of, how when you're working in certain businesses and they're explaining their business model to you and they're like, we are the Uber of something, you can kind of say, well, when you're, the startup brand or the newer brand within a larger brand, we are the something version of the brand you already know. So for Trainline instance, for Trainline Business, where I was doing the marketing there, we are the business version of Trainline. We're Trainline, but for business. It kind of helps you explain what it is, and people already go, oh, well, if they already know what that parent brand is, then they kind of already begin to get the gist, and it helps with that explanation a lot more.
You've got a sort of immediate credibility, rather than having, like, if you're working for a new startup, you've got to sort of work to borrow people's credibility and build that sort of brand presence work. And that takes a long time to do, in my experience. So I guess you shortcut some of that, but then you've equally got the problem of people being like, well, I didn't really realise that you did anything in that space anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Precisely.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. One thing I really wanted to talk to you about was something that you posted this week, which was your predictions for 2025 and beyond. So there's obviously New Year, everyone's sort of coming up with predictions, but I thought yours were particularly interesting, and there's some meaty stuff in there. So what the first one was something that I'm super passionate about, which was balancing brand and growth. So I wanted to get your viewpoints on why you think that's a sort of prediction for this year, and what you meant by that, really.
Yeah, I mean, I focused a lot, or I work with a lot of startups and scale-ups, and it's an ever-present, challenge for those kind of businesses. where, as we just discussed, you're trying to build that credibility in your marketplace, in your niche. And, I see a lot of businesses that either go kind of really hard one way or really hard the other, go straight into the growth, straight into the performance marketing, straight into that digital strategy, or they spend, a lot of time doing, we really need to establish brand. We really need to make sure that we're, differentiating ourselves in the marketplace, but then not necessarily, encouraging that, sign ups, the customer registrations, whatever that, that key metric is. So, for me, it's about that prediction was just around really trying to figure out what that balance is. And if you're not able to figure that out for, that a startup business or a scale up business, and if you haven't figured that out, then finding that balance is really key. It's not just startups and scale ups. I've worked in much larger businesses that have that challenge. And one of the most successful strategies that I implemented probably in one of those businesses was differentiating and basically kind of locking away brand spend apart from the sort of growth, which is, I think, how we refer to it nowadays, the growth spend, and saying, right, this is all 100% proven, well, not 100%. This is all proven ROI. If I'm spending this, I'm getting this. This over here is more long-term kind of ROI. Like, we might not be able to track this. There's different kind of metrics that we're going to, be looking at in terms of tracking this, but it's not going to have a clear line of attribution into this marketing revenue generation engine, and having those two things and locking them away separate from another and tracking them differently, it really made me be able to create that balance in terms of brand and performance and growth.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, but I think one of the challenges that we have as marketers, especially people that advocate brand strategy as part of a growth overall growth metrics, is that quite often I think we fall into the trap of having the conversation at a financial level, and what tends to happen is that you end up trying to justify the work that you need to do to grow the brand based on ROI and based on what the CFO says that they need. And I think actually it's a misunderstanding of how growth works, because growth, it's not, like you say, it's not always predictable. You can't always say, right, I'm going to spend £100 on this advertising campaign and it's going to bring me £1,000. Therefore, if I spend £1,000, I'm going to get £10,000. It doesn't work like that. And actually, if you, especially within B2B, generally speaking, about 5% of your total market is going to be within market at any one time, buying a product or in a sort of set process, which means that if you're only focused on that 5%, you're missing the bulk of the market that would buy you at some point in the next 18 months or so. So why wouldn't you do good brand work and build up that sort of trust and relevance with them over a period of time, and then allow your performance work to actually capitalize on that and bring them into the pipeline? That's my thought process on it completely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the whole 95% rule thing is one of those things that really comes out. We see it a lot on LinkedIn, and I think the more we talk about it, the more, business leaders are actually going to begin latching onto that kind of thing. And then it will become one of those things that they say back to you in those meetings. And you're like, oh, okay, great. You heard people talking about that 5 years ago, but great, it's relevant. You get what I'm putting down, and those communications with those, the C-suite, the CFOs, the CEOs, of those kind of companies, it really makes that connection. And yeah, the benefits of being able to bring in the differentiated metrics for brand work, which are very different from growth, and say this is how this is having an impact, and this is what this is going to bring in terms of business value to the company, and the CFO or the CEO understanding that is a big win for marketing.
Yeah, 100%. I think you have to speak their language, but you also have to make it, I think, not really simple, because that makes it sound like you have to dumb it down, which isn't true. But you have to make it impactful and do a little bit of internal marketing. I think to that sort of C-suite, I always say to people that, people don't buy a Rolex because they got sent an email at the right time that they're looking for a watch. They buy it because of what it says about them, and because it's and they know it's quality and whatever else. And the same is true of a lot of things. Like, people shop at Aldi rather than Waitrose because they're more focused on value and getting good value for their money, or it's a cheaper alternative it's seen as, although technically that's not true anymore. There's loads of examples like that you can explain to people why we have to do good brand work, because relevancy creates opportunity. I think we have to. I'm sort of almost a little bit fed up of the conversation that I suspect happens quite a lot on LinkedIn, where people are sort of almost moaning at the fact that my CEO doesn't really understand marketing, or I'm having to justify myself to a CFO. So of course you have to. Every other department does as well. Like, your budget has to be justified some way, but you just have to be able to communicate properly. And we are professional communicators, so let's do it.
Yeah, I mean, internal communications are. If you've nailed your internal communication as a marketer, it's a secret superpower.
100%. Yeah, it can unlock so much budget and opportunity. 100%. The second thing that you mentioned is AI goes mainstream, and this is, everybody is talking about AI at the moment. Every product team is talking about how they're going to get AI into their product. Every marketer is talking about how they use it. Everybody's talking about it. What do you think is the big thing that's going to change this year, from everyone just sort of doing a little bit of work on LLM platforms to actually doing some really sort of intelligence-based AI that's going to make a difference in the way that business works?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a hot take, is it? AI becoming mainstream. It's really, what everyone's saying, especially, on LinkedIn at the moment. I mean, for me, it was this year that I sort of started, diving into the use of AI, and probably starting in the way that a lot of people, marketers, really anyone, is just figuring out like how to work it. What those, what you put in and how you get out, and then how do I use that for my personal life? How do I use that for business, etc. And I think going into, we're in 2025 now, but for the rest of 2025, I think people's are going to be using it in a smarter way. I think in terms of business and in terms of marketing, I think this year is going to be the year where really innovative marketers, or people on the cutting edge of marketing, are going to be bringing that in, not in the ways that necessarily people are using at the moment to like create content, to create, to build strategies, etc. I don't think it's there yet, and I don't think it's going to. I don't think LLMs are going to be, creating strategies that are any better or worse than what people are already doing. I think the smart people are going to be using it to integrate processes and build frameworks, and see how and figure out how that links into other softwares that they have within their stack, so integrating it into their tech stack and things. I think that's where really clever marketers are going to be utilizing AI. I also think that within maybe towards the end of this year, perhaps, but definitely 2026, 2027, we're going to see the rise of, I'm thinking, a new set of kind of skills in terms of maybe even job roles of like AI prompting, much in the same way that you can give someone Adobe Photoshop. It doesn't mean that they're going to create something good. They might be able to create something. They're not going to create something necessarily good if they haven't really, figured it out. Same thing with, the AI, the data that you put in and the prompting, etc., that you put in, and what you teach it on is only as good as, the stuff that you get out is only as good as the stuff that you put in. If your prompts are terrible, you're not going to get out what you want. And I think going into the, the end of this year, next year, that having really skilled prompters that know exactly how to get out what you want and interpreting what I'm saying to put into that LLM and get out the result that I want is going to be a really big thing as well.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, it's a superpower of the future, definitely. Like being able to build sophisticated sort of almost sort of virtual assistants, if you like, through AI. I think it's such an interesting thing. I played with it a little bit myself this year in terms of like, I got a premium ChatGPT license for the basis of, well, how do I, if I could potentially train this thing to be my assistant, how intuitive could it become? It's definitely not like 100% of the way there yet, but there are certain things that you can do with it, which is like, when I want, if I ask you to write something like this, use this type of language, or for this customer, when we're reviewing this type of brief from them, split out this thing into to-dos for me, or something like that. That's really basic stuff, but I think sort of in the future, that might get to like a more, like I said, like a vertical AI type model where it's looking across different data sets or different platforms or something like that, and then can intuitively tell you what you need to know. That would be amazing.
Yeah, I
Absolutely.
mean, I think that if people aren't already doing it at the moment, but I can see ways in which it's plugged into things like chatbots, and taking all the data from previous chatbots and from your website and wherever else the data is pulled from, and being able to automatically, because the rise of chatbots was huge, and it was really helpful. But I think we've got to that point of stagnation now with a lot of chatbots
Yeah.
where I go, hey, do you want to talk about chatbot? And I'm like, no, because you're going to give me 6 options, and none of them are going to be helpful. And 1 in 10 times it is actually about a payment issue, and you're able to resolve it. But 9 out of them, I still need to end up speaking to a person. That evolution of them, I think, is going to be, you'll be able to plug something like, AI into that, and actually, they become useful again.
Yeah.
I think.
From a consumer-facing perspective, I think that also talks to your brand. I had this challenge with a business that I worked at before, where we were talking about the problem of how do we implement a chatbot that's going to solve 80-90% of the issues that we're getting through customer support tickets that are all the same thing. Like, how do I find this thing, or how do I answer this problem? Where there's already a training video that we've created for it. We just need to direct them to it, so that the team are freed up to do the other sort of 10-20% of really deep work. And I think the way that we decided to solve that was build the model, but then make sure that there's always a visible I just want to speak to a person button, so that you can get around that loop, and you don't get that sort of frustration loop that you get quite often. I think Amazon are quite bad at this. There's like the tracking platforms tend to be quite bad at this. You're constantly having to ask it the right question so that you find your way to an advisor, and you have to almost become get a degree in engineering to work out how to get through to somebody, and it's just frustrating.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's kind of where, my prediction in terms of AI for this year, rather than just, hey, write me a blog, is going to be a lot more around, integration into processes and software.
Yeah. I definitely don't think, sounds like you sort of agree, but I definitely don't think that AI is going to take anybody's jobs, especially if you're a talented creative, because I think, if you take, for example, a really talented copywriter, they might use AI to brainstorm and come up with some ideas and do some research for them or something like that. But it's never going to be like the buzzwords that come out of like ChatGPT. If it's something's been written by them, like empower or leverage or something like that, it always tends to come up with. It's never going to replace those people's jobs, because you have to have I think, quite a unique understanding of somebody's brand positioning to be able to write amazing content that hits people.
I did do some tests this year with feeding in brand frameworks and tone of voice and big documents into LLMs, and seeing if they were able to replicate that tone of voice in writing, and it was still quite a miss in that sense. And even when they were kind of on the right track, you still needed a person to edit it and make it add that final finesse. You couldn't just take it out and put it in there. So maybe, but I don't think that people are going to be losing out their jobs on.
Definitely not. I think if you're using it for that purpose, then you're missing the point of what it's supposed to be doing.
It's so much more powerful than that. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. So you use it to start a thing, but then finish it and add your own spice to it. Otherwise, content's just going to become just so boring across all. No one's going to engage with the content. So 100%. Your next prediction was about vertical videos. So vertical videos have been around for a long time. What's your prediction?
Well, I think this was partly from the rise for me on LinkedIn of the vertical video, and how they're pushing it more and more and more. Obviously, in terms of phones, smartphones, vertical video has been around with on Meta, on TikTok and Snapchat for a really long time. But I think we've reached. I think this has probably come from like I said, it being integrated into LinkedIn now, I think we've reached that tipping point in B2B where we're okay with those vertical videos and the slightly more conversational style that you attribute to those kind of videos in B2B now. And rather than the more sort of not necessarily shorter form, but the long form, oh, hi, I'm, Barry, and I'm here to talk to you about the new product features of our platform in a 13, 20, 40, minute webinar video uploaded to YouTube. It might be now a much more conversational, recorded on a smartphone perhaps, or however it's recorded, but in that vertical sort of conversational chatty way. It's the whole way in which B2B is, it feels to me like B2B is always a couple of steps behind where B2C was a few years ago, and it's become so ingrained because as a consumer of B2C content, etc., or if I'm buying anything, if I'm shopping for new garden furniture, I'm consuming that kind of content, and it gets to the point where I'm okay with taking those reviews and taking those authority figures at face value in those kind of videos. And why would I not be okay with that now in B2B? And especially with this is probably a larger topic, especially with the new generation of, Gen Zers coming into the workplace and really shifting a lot of those. They're not necessarily at the stage where they're decision makers, but they might be influencers. They might be the people that are doing the research for those decision makers. And that means they're still going to be the people that are putting those things in front of those decision makers, if that makes sense. So I think those more conversational sort of vertical videos and the way in which consumer have been kind of selling almost for the last few years is going to really pull into B2B, and the way in which businesses address the consumers and their potential market audience is I think is going to change.
100%. I think it's I say it's a case of what people are used to as well. More people spend more time unfortunately on their smartphones now than they ever have done. And the rise of TikTok and Reels and things like that. That's what people do. They spend their time watching. And if like you say, if you're researching something like a new piece of furniture, or I was talking to you just before we started the call about, I've just bought a pram for my baby that's due in a few weeks, and we just researched that on like TikTok. You just find what people were interested in, what people liked, what they didn't like, that type of thing. And consumer brands, like you say, have been doing it for so long that it's almost become the norm. It's almost become, well, of course, that's where you search for stuff. But I think, like I say, B2B always seems to have been, is it maybe like an air of arrogance that it's not the professional way of doing things, so we won't do that. We're going to do it in this way. And actually, the way often B2B is doing sort of maybe product marketing or thought leadership type stuff, actually quite dull. And unless you're really, really interested in that subject matter, and even then you probably switch off. Like half the stuff that comes up about even marketers can be guilty of this. You watch some content and you're like, that's just really not interesting. Like it's just even the way it's presented. And I think we have to, like I say, if we can get away from that and start to do a little bit more, testing and building some personality in some of our content, like by having sort of, like you say, a more conversational style, why wouldn't that work? Like definitely, I would recommend people give that a go, 100%.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, not to get into the larger issue, but when I started, 13 years ago, the business decision makers were the generation above us.
Yeah.
The Gen X, the boomers, that did want that more professional tone. They wanted you to turn up in a suit and tie, and they wanted you to shake their hand, and they wanted you to show that level of interest and respect, and talk about things in a professional manner, because that's how they were taught, and that's what they want. And I think now you've got millennials as the business decision makers and the buyers. Actually, we don't need or necessarily want that. We are a bit more digital literate, so to speak, for lack of a better phrasing of it. And we're fine with. I think we're fine with. A lot of us are fine with that conversational tone, and it's still being influenced by what we're seeing online from other platforms that aren't B2B related, like you say, TikTok.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's even true of, this is completely off topic, but I think that's even true of things like CVs. My pet hate is just people just sending a templated CV and they've not spent any time trying to understand me or the role or the company or anything like that. Like, why not send a video? Why not just record a video on your phone and send it to somebody's email address? Personally, I couldn't give two hoots if you've got a really professional CV or not. Like, send me a LinkedIn profile, send me a video, and I'll probably speak to you more likely than if someone sent me the other. So
Yeah, I think I agree with the LinkedIn profile thing. If I were to go on someone's LinkedIn profile and they've got a bunch of stuff that I'm like, oh, this is really relevant, then that I think would have a greater impact than a really well constructed CV.
100%. And the next one was about SEO evolution. So SEO, I think I've spent quite a lot of my marketing career in very niche industries. So SEO has not necessarily been the most important thing to sort of move the needle, if you like, because there's lots of other stuff that we can do that's going to have more of an impact now. So I'm definitely not an SEO expert by any means. So what's evolving in that space? What do you see changing over 2025?
Well, I think you already slightly touched upon it when you were talking about your research for the pram that you were buying for your for your upcoming little one. I think Google are doing a lot of changes. There's challenges that lots of businesses are facing with the decline of website traffic. Obviously, for years and years and years, Google has been the main thing. You've got to you understand what Google want and then appease them. Now, I think that's still very much true, but there are many other ways in which people do that kind of market research, let's say. You mentioned TikTok. I do the same. If I'm looking for a certain type of inspiration or a certain type of thing, I'll go to TikTok for it. I also go to Reddit for a lot of stuff now, directly to Reddit, not even necessarily through Google to find it. There are lots of different sort of search engines or ways in which you can search for things nowadays, and especially back to AI, especially with AI and being able to ask AI questions. And I think we're still going to figure out what that looks like. But optimizing your business, optimizing your website, optimizing your products for AI searches is going to be a whole new thing that we're going to have to figure out. So I think anyone that says SEO is dead is, I think, probably being a bit over dramatic. Yeah. It's not dead, but it's definitely going to change. It's definitely evolving. The way in which consumers research and make those decisions is not just by Googling it anymore. It's multiple different touch points across multiple different platforms that you might capture that in Google. That is still possibly where they go, right, I've done all my research, now I'm going to Google it, and that might still be the place of high intent, but it's not necessarily where they've done all of their research. So yeah, I think for me it's there are lots of different places that people go for different types of things in terms of research, and being able to optimize for all of them, not just for Google, is what I think is going to be a challenge for 2025 in terms of search.
So it's still such a new thing. I think like ChatGPT's only brought out, I think in the last 3 months, their search functionality. So it is a really new thing. So I think understanding how to optimize for that whilst not losing grounds with where a lot of your search traffic might be still coming from, which is probably still Google for the time being. It's probably still the leader in most people's industries, unless I think probably I would probably make a prediction that most B2B companies, most of their traffic is coming organically from Google or direct from social channels. I would suggest. So I think it's probably not something that's maybe it's not an immediate concern, but maybe it's one that you need to keep an eye on this year and work out how you optimize your landing pages for the way that ChatGPT might want something to be delivered. And if that's completely different to Google, then you might have a problem, but something to think about.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing with Google is that obviously they're trying to keep people on Google,
Yeah.
and with the AI suggestions at the very, very top of the search now,
Mm.
it's one of the things that's having the effect on, decreasing web traffic, because if they're, it's like the SERPs, it's,
Yeah.
like that, but kind of, I don't know how you find those, AI generated answers. Sometimes they're fine, sometimes they're god
Yeah.
awful.
I take them with a pinch of salt. Quite
Yeah.
often, I think, with ChatGPT, I think it's taught me to not believe what it says. So I tend to sort of fact check everything that it's telling me. If I've asked it for some research specifically, I'll go, okay, I'll go and Google that. And then actually, that's true also of Google's AI overview
Hmm.
thing that they do, where it's like it will pick out summaries from websites that it thinks is trustworthy. But then you'll find, so earlier I was looking at turnover figures for some competitors for a research project I was doing. And I found that AI gave me a answer, and I was like, that can't be right. It was like something like the SaaS and technology sector in the UK is worth £83 million a year in turnover. I was like, that's definitely not true. So I
Yeah.
got to go and look at like some
Yeah.
other research bases, and it was like, oh, actually, it's like 86 billion. So I was like, okay. So it's a bit, I don't know quite how it's working, but it's clearly ranking websites based on what it thinks is trustworthy and then serving that information up. But it doesn't seem to be getting it right.
And it's reducing that web traffic, and it's pushing things down that were potentially, if you were ranked number 10, now you might be on the second page, so it's reducing your website traffic, in that sense. So then essentially what you're optimizing for is you're optimizing for an AI search, or a SERP at best, and not necessarily a click-through.
Yeah, which is interesting, I think, because I think, ultimately the thing that you should be optimizing for is trustworthiness and, validatable data or whatever. But Google doesn't seem to care about that for some reason. But yeah, it's interesting that, like you say, like position 10 2 years ago would probably be something that like, okay, that's something we can build on. It's okay. It's first page.
Hmm.
Now, probably second page. That's probably not okay anymore. I mean, I can't remember the last time I went on the second page of Google search. So it's,
Yeah, I mean, I do sometimes, but usually I'm gonna re-Google something because I feel like I've made the mistake rather than
yeah,
Google, because I've not got the
you
results.
haven't queried it properly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And then the last prediction that you made for this year was about in-person event shrinking, and this is interesting because I think my last role that I left last summer started during COVID, so I saw the sort of rise of online web content, and we rode that wave for a long time, and then back end of that when everyone sort of came out of the houses again, in-person events were like the thing. Everyone wants to go and meet people face to face, and they boomed for ages, and we got loads of value from it. And then sometime last year, that seemed to tail off a little bit in my experience. So I'm guessing you're sort of seeing a similar thing.
Yeah, basically, yeah. I think that they'll never go away fully. It's a very large industry, but I think that the justification of the big spends, I'm was thinking more like those big corporate, events, the ones that are the Excel, the
Yeah,
international ones, CES, I think, is coming
yeah,
up soon. Those kind of things, is the justification on those big spends is going to be more difficult, because although you get that wide exposure, and you create those, there's MQLs, etc., you still have to qualify them, and the challenge with working sales and marketing, and where does the pipeline go, and who's responsible for that, and where does the fight between sales and marketing, essentially,
mhm,
and where that goes in the future. I think it's not going to go away, but I don't think people are going to be able to justify those large spends
mhm,
in the future. There's always going to be a space for the handshake, but I think tightened budgets mean that those big spends are going to be reduced, and maybe we see less of the large things, and we see more of the medium one, or potentially the medium one disappears completely, because actually often what does happen in marketplaces is it's not the big and the small, it's the medium that disappears,
yeah,
especially like for instance, it's a good example in the retail space, especially in 2020. The large brands stayed, the small brands stayed, but the medium tier, brands
Shops,
disappeared.
yeah.
So actually, as I'm saying this, it's much more likely that perhaps the large ones do stay. You get a lot of much more niche small ones that cost a lot less, but you lose that middle brand. But either way, I think there's going to be a reduced spend on those kind of things, and in favor of other marketing channels and techniques.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a bit of a shame because I think, especially with pretty much everyone works from home these days, it's a shame that there's not more opportunity to get out there and meet people. But I mean, it does make sense. I think that from my experience, the most valuable events that you can invest your money in are ones where it's not necessarily a big exhibit show and it's got big talks or whatever else, but it's ones where, like you said, they're smaller. There's maybe 20 or 30 prospects. They know exactly what they want. They're pre-qualified, and then the organisers just go and find those people to come and turn up and say, "We've got people that are pre-qualified in your market. Would you like to come and meet them?" And it's more of a networking opportunity, and a couple of days of maybe some thought leadership content or something like that. Those type of things tend to really work.
I think what's key there is pre-qualified, isn't it?
Yeah.
And sort of niche, and it kind of really goes back to what you said earlier around that sort of 95%. Those pre-qualified, that's probably that 5%.
Yeah.
Those are the people that probably are ready to buy, and then meeting them face to face, is going to have that impact that maybe gets them over the line into qualified into your sales cycle or whatever that may be. But those other 95% and spending 150 grand on potentially meeting them, but they're not in that 5% at the moment. As we discussed, it's not right to do it, but to spend 150 grand on it, I think the conversations with your CFO are going to be more difficult.
Yeah.
And the question, what's the ROI on this, is going to be
It's a challenge.
hard one to have.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation to have. I think at that level, it's what's the ROI is almost, it's like how long is a piece of string? It's like, well, this in the next 6 months the ROI is probably 0, but in the next 24 months the ROI might be 200%. You don't know, and it's really difficult to therefore justify that. But yeah, I mean that's a broader problem, I think. But there's some interesting predictions, I think, for 2025, and I think I largely agree with all of them. AI is definitely going to play a place. Brand and growth I'm super passionate about. I think the only slight caveat I'd make to that is I think what I'm certainly seeing, and it might be confirmation bias, but what I'm certainly seeing is the more brands are starting to talk about sort of storytelling and how they do brand work really, really well. Actually borrowing some of those lessons from sort of our colleagues in B2C, and how do they tell that story, I think is something that's super valuable. I was actually meeting with an entrepreneur yesterday, and their big differentiator is, they're in a heavily regulated financial market, and they haven't got budgets because they're a startup to spend huge amounts of money on performance marketing. Their differentiator, therefore, is we're a founder, we've spotted the problem, this is how we're going to solve it, and they're sort of orientated towards their market. And during that conversation, that's what was my advice to him, was just tell that story then, because that's the most important thing for you. It's not that you're the same as somebody else but cheaper, or you got a slightly different widget. It's your story and why you're doing it. I think that would be my only slight caveat to that.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. My opinion on that is, I think the sort of founder startup brand scale ups, that kind of area, have a better connection to a kind of narrative and a story that they can build. It's much more difficult when you're in a much larger brand. You've been established for a long, long time, and you kind of got more chefs in the kitchen, and you've got more hurdles to go through to kind of create that narrative. Especially if you've been around for a while and there's any kind of bad blood, negativity in terms of your product or services.
Yeah, that's a really difficult one actually to get over, is if there's an existing bad feeling about a company. It's really challenging from a marketing perspective to sort of counterbalance that. You might have to have an amazing brand to be able to do that. I don't know that I've ever seen that particularly well done, unless there's a big shift in the business, unless there's we're also shifting the way that we do customer support because we recognise it's a problem. We're also shifting some of our product strategy or something like that. I think that like you say, founder-led businesses tend to get it because they tend to naturally orientate themselves towards the customer, because they either were the customer before, or they started the business because they knew that there was a problem because they were working for a competitor. They were getting beaten up by the customers all day about how the problem was wrong, so they went and did their own thing. That tends to work extremely well. But, yeah. Poor practices then in marketing is something that I think is interesting to go on, and this is something that I've ranted about a little bit before. I think it's always interesting to get somebody's perspective, especially somebody that's an experienced sort of marketing leader. What things are you seeing? Either where you sort of go and speak to companies, or where you sort of review businesses or whatever. What sort of poor things are you seeing consistently that are things that you just wish businesses didn't do or didn't waste their time on?
Since I started marketing, a while back, especially in B2B, it's evolved. When I first started working in B2B, marketing was so often seen as like the support to sales. What are you doing in terms of helping, create that deck, create that, and there's that element of it that still, is important. But it's evolved now so that marketing is much more of a standalone kind of revenue generation piece of the business. Some of the most difficult things, and this is a mistake that I made a couple of times in my earlier career, and you see people talking about it a lot on LinkedIn, is around attribution. It's a very difficult subject. We've already talked about, the relationship with the CFO and the finance team. It's never going to be 100% solved. Understanding where your product fits within the marketplace, how you're connecting with people and how they're getting to your product, and where you can attribute that from your marketing perspective, but being able to have 100% accurate, pure marketing attribution for me is like chasing the golden dragon. I've never worked in a business where that exists. If you get, 50, 60, 70% or something, we know that 70% of people have come from here. The other 30%, we're not entirely sure. Utilizing, and this might be a contentious thought, having either just first touch or last touch attribution doesn't work. It's only ever going to hurt your other marketing channels. If you're able to get an attribution model where it's, every touch is, has an equal attribution. But for me, one of the big things around is just chasing that 100% attribution model and being able to say, this is exactly where everything came from. This is exactly where every penny of our budget has gone, and this is exactly what we got back off the back of it. It's just impossible, and it's a waste of your time.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's something that I've been so frustrated with it, doing an internal role before, for exactly those reasons. If you do last touch, it gives too much credit to the channels that are not really doing the heavy lifting, that are just finishing off and getting people over the line, and generally they're sales-led stuff. If you do first touch, it sort of gives a bit too much credit to something that might be a little bit too hyped up, or very very clickbaity or whatever else. Multi-touch is definitely the way to go, but it's almost impossible to implement fully.
Yes,
especially with GDPR and e-privacy laws and things like that. You can never get 100% view digitally of a customer journey. I've never seen it done.
No.
And I've had many discussions like this with people that are far cleverer than I am at sort of digital and data and everything else. And I don't know that it's even possible to do. But I think if you can get, like you said, you can get a bit further there than just last touch. If you can say, these people, this is the journey that most people go through, or these are the channels that we're seeing popping up most, then that just gives you a signal and tells you invest more of your money in those channels then, because they're clearly working.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing in terms of these might not be particularly useful or insightful. But the other thing that really comes to mind, and we kind of talked about around it a lot, is the relationship between the different teams within the marketing business. I think for business, for B2B marketing, it's really integral, is to make sure that you're aligned with all of the other teams, especially product. Product, sales, finance should be your best friends, and having key relationships with the other key stakeholders within those teams, and for it not to be a fight. That's a much more easily said than done. I've had many a confrontation, let's say, with someone from finance or someone from sales or someone from product, because often marketing can be the first to be blamed for things. But if you're all on the same page and you all understand that you're working towards the same goal, you're all in the same business. If you're able to create those relationships and make sure that everyone's working together rather than kind of against each other, and it's not a blamey culture, then you're on the road to success. But a lot of the time that I've seen, and businesses that I've worked in, not having any of those relationships is going to just make your life so much harder.
100% agree. 100%. Yeah, it's such a challenge if you're, if you have a sales department that almost look at you as a department that just supports them, then it's a non-starter. And equally, if you have a product team that are really embedded in what development are doing, obviously they have to be, but they're not then sharing that information with marketing and sales. It's a recipe for disaster. So like the first thing that I've done previously with companies is just get all of the get everybody in a room. What are we trying to do? Which direction are we trying to pull in? What are our priorities as a group? How will we align better? Is that a weekly catch up? Is it a monthly? Is it we set some objectives together as a sub team, if you like? How do we work that? But you have to get there at some point. Otherwise, like you say, you end up becoming the guy that just does we're going to create a presentation for sales and we're going to create an email that tells our customers what the product team have been working on. And then you're not serving the purpose of what you're supposed to be doing, which is driving growth.
Yeah, exactly. It's much more top line, but it's something that I didn't put a lot of effort and attention into when I was earlier in my career. And if I had probably figured that out, I might have found life to be a bit easier as a younger, career marketer.
Yeah, 100%. It's one of those things that I think you don't learn at a university. There's no real marketing courses that tell you. It's a sort of leadership quality, if you like, isn't it? Of how to win friends and influence people, basically.
Well, that's funny. My friend was talking to me about that over Christmas, actually. He was reading How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it's amazing how outdated that book is now.
Yeah, it is. It got recommended to me by a mentor of mine that I had a while ago. And I was like, when he said it to me, I was like, oh, do I not make friends? But actually, I was like, okay, it's a really interesting book. It has a lot of things that you can take away from, but it's a bit corny because it's about
it's very
corny. Yeah. If you can get away from that, it's actually quite an interesting read. So yeah, pick it up if you're interested. But yeah, I think that brings us to a close, David. So thank you very much for your time and sharing your insights. That was really useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me.